You turn my morning into dancing. You turn my morning into dancing. You turn my morning into dancing. 'Cause your love changes everything. Your love changes everything. Oh, there's something about your love. Something about your love changes everything in my body. Oh, something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. It changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. It changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. Changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. Changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. Changes everything. Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything. You turn my morning into dancing. 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 Something about your love. Something about your love changes everything.
Good morning, Rooted Men. Matt Ryan from the Rooted Ministries. Pleasure to be with you this yet another cold, snowy, icy, nasty morning. Just seems to be a pattern we can't get out of here. I know that it's been sunny later in the day, and at some point, spring and summer will come again. But man, it's hard to believe right now. I hope things are going well for you. Hope you're staying warm and comforts of life, right, are abounding, regardless of what's going on outside. So we're working our way through Joshua as we have been, so far this entire new year. And in today's lesson is pretty interesting. So we look at, and I never know if you can see this. Hopefully you can. But we're the conquest of I guess, is kind of how this is known. I was real interested after I read through it to figure out where I was modern day, right? It's almost like there's this mythical geography, right? When we are dealing with these biblical stories, there's so much question in my mind anyway about where we are, because it always seems like we're talking about a far off land. The reality is, if they're correct, and there seems to be some scholarly dispute about modern day I being in two different locations, but they're not real far from each other. They're only somewhere about 10 miles north of Jerusalem. So I think maybe it's because of Hollywood or because of stories in our lives or whatever, we think of war in these battles as they're always the far off land, right? And the world was a lot smaller in the ways that 10 miles was a far off land at that time. But this is probably no different than Lake Orion and Auburn Hills maybe have a war with each other. So it's kind of just interesting to remember, not that they're neighbors, but they got a lot more in common with each other than they don't. And so it's interesting to think about so many examples throughout the Old Testament, and this is yet another one of them, where when a nation that forgets God, a nation that turns against God, and the lengths he'll go to, and what all transpires in order to wipe them from the earth, which is such a strange thought to us today, right? Whenever there's genocide or there's people being attacked or whatever, all of our responses are to rush in and help them, but just does such a different mindset, such a different time. And when you think about the promises that have been made to Joshua by God over this book so far, in this chapter specifically, it's a lot to think about, right? We, and it's not a bad thing, but we tend to think about when God's driving us to do things, what are we thinking? The opportunities to serve somebody, right? We see somebody who's homeless. Are we going to give them some money on the side of the road? Are we going to find a way to feed them? Whatever it is, it's always helping. And here Joshua's given this message to, oh yeah, you're going to carry out my plan by completely annihilating these people, not just the warriors, but the women, the children, everybody. Everything will be burned to ash. You're going to, take their king and put him on a stake and make a show out of his body because you have conquered them in my name. That's pretty grim, right? I don't know if any of you are having regular conversations with God where he's asking you to do something like that now, but boy, how different it would be. Not only that, but you got to think about facing the humanity of making those kind of decisions, of doing those things that you've been commanded to do, and acting on them in faith all the way through. And that's really what we're talking about today. So we look quick through, the men of Ai looked back and saw the smoke of the city rising up to the sky, but they had no chance to escape in any direction. The Israelites who'd been fleeing toward the wilderness had turned back against their pursuers. For when Joshua and all Israel saw the ambush had taken the city, and the smoke was going up from it, they turned around and attacked the men of Ai. Those in the ambush also came out of the city against them, so they were caught in the middle, with Israelites on both sides. Israel cut them down, leaving them neither survivors nor fugitives. But they took the king of Ai alive and brought him to Joshua. When Israel had finished killing all the men of Ai in the fields and in the wilderness where they had chased them, and when every one of them had been put to the sword, all the Israelites returned to Ai and killed those who were in it. 12,000 men and women fell that day, all the people of Ai. For Joshua did not draw back the hand that held out his javelin until they had destroyed all who lived in Ai. But Israel did carry off for themselves the livestock and plunder this city as the Lord had instructed Joshua. So Joshua burned Ai and made it a permanent heap of ruins, a desolate place to this day. He impaled the body of the king of Ai on a pole and left it there until evening. At sunset, Joshua ordered them to take the body from the pole and throw it down at the entrance to the city gate. They raised a large pile of rocks over it, which remains to this day. Yikes, right? That's pretty heavy stuff. And so how, in a world that we look only to serve and to build a fellow man up, can we get ourselves to a place where we can really think about what that means? Not just to go out and conquer, but to have all these things you can't explain happen to bring about absolute annihilation, decimation, erasing a people for all time. So, right, the big overarching message here is about obedience, right? When God makes a promise, he comes through, right? And so there's several promises God had made that come through here. It's not just to take down the enemy, but it's also, you think back to the wandering in the wilderness, right? Their sustenance was coming from manna every day because God had promised to provide for them. Now, through their obedience and their commitment to doing it the way God told them, they're blessed with all these tangible rewards, right? Nourishment for their journey, nourishment, riches that would provide nourishment. Now all of a sudden their physical needs are taken care of in ways that they couldn't have expected and couldn't have planned, right? And so the spoils of victory, right? They talked about, and what would have been normal was to just take the cattle as the spoils, but this was, God specifically said, no, take it all. It's all for you. I continue to provide for you. It's still pretty dark, right? It's dark. We don't think of God fulfilling his promises in such dark ways, right? But there's a message there about obedience, regardless of what was asked, that, obedience is going to bring out better than we could have thought, right? And so we stand looking at all kinds of eyes, right? All kinds of enemies, all kinds of people or obstacles that stand against us. They may seem daunting, right? They're certainly not as daunting as an entire people warring against you, right? The reality is that we stumble, we fail, we are disobedient. And here we see God providing a second chance, right? Because his people brought their failings to him, because they were truly repentant and they truly wanted to be restored to him, there still awaited spiritual spoils, as we like to think about, the lesson of the prodigal son, right? There are second chances. There is redemption out there when we are obedient to his word, obedient to his call. And that obedience also means submission, right? But it's even when the call makes no sense, even when the instructions are beyond what we can handle. So, there's this other side, which is the spoils, and talks about, material blessings. We live in a world where our material blessings are very much about comfort. In fact, I just read a book called The Comfort Crisis that was super interesting, about how much we miss out on, how unhealthy we are, all kinds of things because of the comforts we live in, right? We go from our 70-degree house to our 70-degree car to a 70-degree workplace or a 70-degree store. We don't have to go out and be in the elements and gather and hunt. And it's just a lot of things we don't think about, but we're so built up in comfort that we kind of, I think, miss the message that material blessings weren't supposed to be about that. They're supposed to be about advancing God's kingdom, right? So, the cattle may have fueled the people on their journey, right? Giving them something to eat, but it also meant herds of cattle to build on for future, to continue that the promised land becomes what it was promised to be, right? So all those blessings were used to meet immediate needs, yes, but it was in abundance. It was set up in a way that they could be used for God's glory and purpose, and set up what turns out to be, a people, a kingdom that's still around today, all these years later. So although it's hard for us to put ourselves in the position of the warrior and the decimating people, I think what's important to take is that in this story, obedience leads to divine provision. And that is a message that's always going to be applicable, right? Our victories in life are really all part of God's design. And in every trial, in every forging, in every testimony, there is building of kingdom purpose. There is glory to God to be had. It's not just put a period when, the part that I cared about is answered. I'm healed. I'm fed. done, period, it's over. No. What am I going to do because of it? How am I going to continue to glorify, to make this a part of God's larger story of design, right? I'm seeking his will. I'm seeking to know that I can claim the spoils of victory when I abide in him, when I follow his lead, that I also have divine spoils to claim, not only for my comfort, but to grow my family, my community, my kingdom, glorify him. Every single gift, every good gift comes from the Father, and every one of them should be used, at least in part, for his glory, right? The same idea of stewardship that we tend to always go to tithing because that's the way we best understand it in our limited humanity. But it's about so much more. Tithing is just that recognition that it comes from you. And so here I humbly give part of it back to serve your kingdom, but an obedient life lived in the Spirit overflows in such a way that so much more than just a little bit of our money, so much more than just our financial tithe, becomes our spiritual tithe, our dedication of our lives to building that kingdom purpose. I hope that's a good word for you. I love you all. I know that this is an old-timey word. Okay. It's from the older part of the Bible, right? It's one of the earliest books. But there's so much universal truth that still applies. So let's carry that with us, gentlemen. Let's be stewards of the blessings that God provides us and challenge ourselves to learn more how to use those spoils for his purpose. I love y'all. Let's have a great, nasty, snowy Friday and a great, nasty, snowy, cold weekend. At least we have the Super Bowl that kind of like this midwinter thing that tells us time's going.
And a great, nasty 6 more weeks of winter.
Yes, and that too.
But at least I'll be happy because I am Bluey.
All right, gentlemen. Let's make it a great day and a firmly rooted day. May someone see Jesus in us today. Peace.